As I mentioned in yesterday's preview video of the upcoming 4th WordPress Developer Camp,
Good morning,
I was going to
everybody.
share a number
We are
of
back here at
videos in
WPStudio, and this is
preparation
a
for the
special
Developer
webinar I
Camp.
added to the
So without
schedule
further
on
ado,
Monday.
here is
The reason why
an
I
earlier
added this,
webinar we did
sorry,
on
I added on
foundational
Sunday.
CSS that is available in the
We
training
need this
library.
webinar in the
And for
library
this
because
week,
it is a
and next week,
foundational
it will be available
CSS
for free here
webinar.
on YouTube.
It deals
I hope
with
you have a great rest
understanding
of the day.
the differences
remember,
of
click the links
selectors
below
in
if you would like
CSS,
to learn more about the upcoming 4th WordPress Developer course.
measurement units like absolute and relative, as well as how we can combine selectors. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to go through it all. So rather than just you seeing a blog post that would explain, okay, an attribute selector that is an adjacent sibling is this. No, we're going to actually go through it. We're going to see how it modifies something. We'll just do some basic CSS colors so you can see how things change, what changes, and what happens with the changes when we combine selectors in different ways. Now, for us to do this, we're going to be using CodePen.io. If you haven't used this before, this is a great little tool to test out some CSS, test out some JavaScript, learn. It allows you to set up an environment where not only your HTML and your CSS, and you can also see the output of what this looks like. And so I thought this would be an easy way for us to see things in real time, watch things as they modify. So just as a reminder, there in the chat room at wpstudio.com/chat, below the chat box is a green button that says download the foundational CSS handout. That is a 25-page PDF. There's a lot of information in there, but it really goes through everything you need. A lot of this, as I said to some of the early birds who showed up, many of these concepts, not concepts, but these ideas and the structure of the lesson is coming from another CSS course that I attended not too long ago, and which gave me the idea of focusing on just the selectors and the lengths and unit measurements. So we're going to start with the very basics. As we all should understand by now, CSS is a way for us to style the output of HTML. Now, I know that most of us work with WordPress or maybe even some other types of dynamic content management systems. I actually I don't think I can make this much larger. If I do make it much larger, it will, let's see. Yeah, if I make it larger, it's just going to blow up the entire browser page. Is that okay? I made it 1 larger on the Zoom. Okay. So with CSS, being able to style and customize the output of HTML, right now there's no CSS, and so this is just straight HTML outputted into the browser in the bottom box down below. It is important to remember that if you use a PHP-based or some other based content management system, the end result that most content management systems output is an HTML version, which that is how a browser knows how to display something. It's going to be in a variation or actual HTML. So therefore, we have to understand the relationship between that CSS uses to target aspects of HTML. And it targets them by selectors. So let's talk about the 3 main selectors. The first one, and again, if you're going to follow along in the handout, we're just going to kind of go down the handout, is an element selector. A lot of times when you're working with a code editor where it marks up or color codes certain parts of your code, the elements are going to be that core code that has been color coded to say that this is part of the HTML language. So elements would be the H1 tag, the P tag, the H2 tag, the unordered list, the list item. These are all element tags because they are HTML elements, which means in CSS, when we target an element selector, all we have to do is duplicate the name of that element. So if I do P and then do color red, what we're going to see is that every single paragraph, we saw it change right here, that has the P tag gets the color red. If we did H1, we are targeting the element H1. So that's the very basics. Any HTML tag can be modified and targeted by CSS. So then we have the class element. The class selector, not element. The class selector is exactly what you would think it is. Somewhere in your HTML, you have a declaration of the name of a class. P, class equals box. So a class, again, some of this may be very basic to some of you, but don't forget the basics, is a period box, or the period, the name of the class. And so now only the content of the document that has and is wrapped by a class box, that's period box, has the color red. So now we have two paragraphs here, but as you can see, only the top one has the red color because only the top one has the class box. So once we've done this, I'm going to also talk about some of the ways of handling this. So you can style just the paragraph box. But what happens if I also put a class box in this one? So I have an H2 that has a class box, and I have a paragraph class box. Well, this means our CSS has to have an additional declaration of the selector, different selector, if we only want the paragraph. And that is adding in the element selector with the class. So for those of you who have looked at CSS style sheets, and sometimes you see an element, period, class, whatever, you may have always wondered, why is that? It's because we are combining that the class must be only in this element selector. You're not going to be combining class. There's a different way of doing that. The only way you can put an element selector with 0 space before the class selector is if it is an element and a class. Does that make sense? So great question, Paul, in the chat room. So why would you give H2 this class? So what if we did this? Box, font, let's just do text, decoration, underline. Something like this. So we wanted everything that has box to have, and I'm just doing some very basic ones, underlining. But we only wanted the paragraph box with color red. Now I can't just do paragraph, the element selector, because that's going to make both paragraphs a selector. Does that make sense? It's sort of where you're trying to do the least common amount of, or the least amount of code possible. And so by learning how to combine these, make a declaration for everything, and then customize out of that. If we didn't do this, we would probably have to have a class for the H2, a class for the paragraph, a class for this, whatever. Okay, so now that we've got those, we now have an ID and I don't have one right here, so I'm just going to do this ID block. And ID has the pound sign. Color red. So now we can see this combines with this. Quick rule of thumb before we leave these selectors, the basic selectors. An ID selector is only going to be used and declared once per page. A class can be multiple. And then the element selector is just whenever. So normally what you're doing, this is the ID is the overarching selector. And therefore, you should only ever apply an ID if it is more of like a wrapper element, like the container ID of a page. Or maybe there is a specific section that you know is never going to be repeated on that page. But if it's talking about paragraphs or if certain display blocks or different paragraphs that might be repeated in different locations on that page, it's always going to be a class. You do not need an ID in your HTML. But IDs also serve an additional purpose. If I were to do this, watch this. Let's wrap in. It's just a reminder about basic. And then we do anchor tag. Let's remove this. There. So we have an anchor tag to basic. If I come down here to this paragraph tag, I'm just going to add basic. And we save this. This will take me down to this special paragraph text. An ID in HTML, and a CSS ID selector, can be used as an anchor tag in your document. So you do not have to have like that name, anchor, whatever for its location. You can use CSS IDs, selectors, as your anchor tag. Any questions on that? I put that out there that the anchor should only be used once. The name, a certain anchor, sorry, the certain ID should only be used once, but you can use it outside of just CSS. So this can be very helpful. And let me give you a WordPress illustration. Let's say you have an email subscription widget that you are using that is either, let's say it's connected to Gravity Forms. Gravity Forms widget, when it puts itself on a page, does have a wrapper ID that wraps around the whole element. Which means if somewhere up further on the page, you simply want to provide a link directly to that sign-up link, you do not need to go in, use a page builder or edit the style or use a hook to add in an anchor tag that would allow us to link there. You can simply add a link, href, to the name of the ID of Gravity Forms. It should make your life easier rather than trying to hack something in the template. All right, so that was a little bit of a rabbit trail. Didn't mean to quite go down that far. So now we come to Combinators. It's kind of a cool name. Many spell checkers will say it's an incorrect word because it's not combination, it's a combinator. All it's saying is we are going to be combining different classes or elements in specific ways. So the first one, and I'll make notes here, is a Descendant Selector. The Descendant Selector simply states that I'm going to select all elements that are a descendant of a specific parent. So for this, what we need to do is I am going to wrap a div tag, div class equals box. We'll add that box thing in there. And I'm going to come down here underneath the paragraph tag and close the div. So all I've just done, nothing has changed here. We've just simply wrapped a div, and it's going to be right in this area to after the paragraph ends. So what this means is when let me get rid of this class because that may cause a little issue. If I do something like box P color red, now what we've got is, take a look at this. I am saying, okay, first find me the class selector and then find me every paragraph tag in there. And we're going to modify that selector. So it only is going to be, and let me scroll all the way down because this is another paragraph. This does not receive the color red because this is a paragraph that is a descendant of this class. This is also why when you are working with your HTML or when you're doing any type of thing, having indentation is going to help. Because if we actually had indentation, we would be able to see that all of this should be in. It's all sub this class. It's below, it's contained, it's wrapped by this class. So now do you see the difference between this, as we did earlier? This is only the paragraph tags that contain a box class. We actually don't have any more of those. This one says all the paragraphs that are inside some other element that has this this class element. All right. So now, once we have this, let me just clean this up, make it a little bit easier. The next one we have is a child selector. The child selector simply selects all the elements that are immediate children of a specific parent. So in order for us to do this one, I'm going to come down here. I already have some list items, but we're going to add something in here. Let me scroll this so you can see how this is going on. So we've got, it's going to be this area right here, this unordered list. This is what we're looking at. I'm going to add just a little bit in here because I'm going to add a few more sub list item, sub list item number 2. Okay, so this is what we're looking at right now. A child selector, if we say, all right, we need, let me add in a class that wraps this, items. And then that's actually all we need. Whoops, scroll down here so you see it. So if we had items, li, color red, every single list item that is a child selector, meaning it's a child of this items, it gets all of them. Descendant selectors are child selectors are very similar to descendant selectors. But where this also is seen is not just in this. A lot of times we'll see it with this to make a pure difference between a descendant selector and a child selector. So when you see the kind of greater than error, or think of it more as this items is pointing to all the list items that are in here, that are immediately descendant. Or immediately part of that child item. There's a reason why we're saying this list item as a child selector, not just a descendant selector, because close by there is a few other list items, but they're not getting any of that. Now, we're going to add one other thing. I'm going to comment this out because you're going to see why. The next one is an adjacent sibling. This is something that is immediately next to what it is that we are looking for. So if I did the same type of thing, items plus li color red, is that items? Oh, sorry, 1 second. Let's try. Just trying to make sure that my examples in the handout are close this 1 second. Okay, so this is a little bit easier. There's an H2 tag and then a paragraph tag. So where this is helpful, anytime there's an H2 tag and immediately following that is a paragraph tag, we can apply our CSS. Now, where would this be used in WordPress? How many of you wish you could always make sure that no matter what blog post your client writes, their first paragraph shows up a little bit bigger, the font is a little bit bigger? Well, rather than writing a special class that would be like a pseudo class that may not be fully supported in all browsers, this way you can now just say, let's say the H2 is the title tag, or maybe there's an H1 as the title tag for your theme, the page title. So it's going to say, you know what? Immediately following an H1 tag, if there is a paragraph tag, we're going to raise the font size 18 pixels. That may actually already be 2 EM. All right, well, that was kind of weird because why isn't it? Let's just make sure it was. Oh, so you guys have to help me. I changed it to H2, which meant there was no paragraph tag. See, there's an H1. There is no paragraph right after an H1. See that? There is no H1. If we remove this class box, let's go back to the H1. So the adjacent requires it to be immediately next to itself. See, now it works. It can't be, well, generally there. That's why it's called the adjacent sibling. The plus sign says it is right there. So we have the adjacent is the plus sign. We have the greater than sign, which is the descendant. It's under that. We do have the descendant selector that are all descendants of a specific parent. And then finally, we have what's called the general sibling. That's right. It's a general sibling. So the general sibling is going to have this little squiggly mark. So notice how all of a sudden this one got the red coloring for the general sibling. This pretty much says select all the paragraph tags that occur after the H2 tag. So it's every single one. So once we start to wrap our brain around the different types of selectors, whether it is a greater than, or a plus sign, or the tilde, this is everything after. This is only the immediate element after, and then only those that are contained within this element. Does that help at all? Most of you may be already familiar with this. It's just a good reminder that these are ways that we can highly customize. And so now to step back and to say, well, how does this apply to me and my WordPress work or my development for the client? Using these type of combinators, we can think ahead of our clients. Because here's a great thing. And it's probably a major thing. It's not going to be here, but I'll give you examples. Let's say if there is an image tag, and again, that is just a regular element selector because that's an HTML element. If there is an image tag immediately after a header tag, maybe we need margin top 10 pixels. So this is going to add a margin to the image tag only if it follows an H2 tag. If you have, or maybe if it's only it follows a paragraph tag. Because maybe your header tags already include enough spacing around images. But this allows you to say, well, you know what, if my image shows up, this is what I'm able to do. Give you another example for those of you who use something like the iThemes Builder theme. You know how you've got different modules. They have different classes, the Builder module content, Builder module, whatever, Builder module image. If you had a Builder module image that came before a Builder module content, maybe you need to add in a border bottom 2 pixels dashed. So that would only the content module, or let's do top. That's what I need. So it would add a border to the top of your content module only if it follows an image module. Does that help draw together why understanding these combinators can make your life easier for your client sites? Because you never know what somebody is going to do either in their content or in their layout or in a future structure. If you know you need extra space, extra borders, extra whatever, this is the way you do it, by selecting the things. And it's almost like conditional logic, because you say this stuff only applies if these two selectors are combined in a certain way. All right, so let's scroll down here. And I know we briefly talked about these type of attribute selectors. I think it was one of our first or second webinars we did here at WPStudio, where we talked about all the different attribute selectors that you could use in styling form fields. So it also is important that we kind of go through, from a CSS perspective, how we could style elements here in this form field. So if I were to say input, And again, that is going to be a regular element selector because input is an HTML element. We can then put our attribute selector by saying type equals text. And we can do something like background color green. So all of a sudden, did you just see that? Our text input form field just put a background green. We've been able to target that specific field by the attribute that exists there. So you can get all of this stuff simply by selecting the attribute of that form element. But this is where it gets even cooler with attribute selections that many people don't realize that we can do. Let's go back up here to the top. We've got some stuff. Let's see. Where'd I have it? Down here. There's a paragraph tag that says this is a special alert. Notice how there are attributes inside this element. Yes, there are classes. So we can now say, I want to make sure that any element, because the asterisk here in CSS says any element, whether it's a class, whether it's an element, or whether it's an ID, everything, any element, doesn't matter the ID or the class, any element, the paragraph tag, table row, all these other things. I can simply say everything if it has the class that equals box. Doesn't have to be only box. We can do color red. So all of a sudden, this is red. And did I remove the others? I did. So paragraph, let's add this one that says class box. Let's add this one that says class box. So all of a sudden now, the H1 tag has this class box. Paragraph tag has class box. Unordered list has class box. And this one has class box as well. So we can do this. So this is important that we can specify. And hopefully now you can see that there is a logic that's going on here. When we did the input type equals text here, we have the type of the attribute name and then the value. Notice how it's the same thing when we did this, the selecting every single element. We have the attribute name, which is class, equals box. Now, I could have done this, where it would have been box, and guess what? This one gets selected, this one gets selected, but why doesn't this one get selected? Well, that's because I said only those elements that have the class as equaling only box. But by removing that and saying this is kind of like contains something that equals box. So a straight equals says it must equal exactly this. The tilde is it contains this. Doesn't matter if it contains more classes or what, as long as it has this class, we're going to target this declaration. So now, guess what we can start to do? If we understand the logic of attribute selectors, I can now say, you know what? All anchor tags that have an href that starts with HTTPS, we're going to say color blue. Oh, it already is blue. Green. Take a look at this. this is an anchor tag, and this is an anchor tag. So now I can say this anchor tag with the attribute, which is the href, that starts with HTTPS, we're going to do green. This anchor tag, attribute href, does not start with HTTPS. So therefore, it's going to not be green. But what if I did this? Change this to any anchor tag that is a link. So now what you've been able to do by understanding this attribute selection on your websites where you have those links for anchor tags to move people around to different locations or to scroll back up to the top or to do everything, you can style them differently than other anchor tags without having to know the class. You can simply say any href that begins with the # is my internal linking system. It's a really cool feature that I don't think people take advantage of because they're sitting there adding classes to all these different things when you don't have to. All you need is a single declaration to identify all those links. Now, you might be saying, you know what? If this caret going up says I want it to start with something, how do I choose how to end with something? Now, you may be thinking, okay, is he just making this stuff up? A lot of it comes with the regex expressions of how we can analyze different strings of characters. But if we do a $ equals .com, this would be if it ends with .com. Notice how, take a look here. This is an anchor tag with the attribute href that ends with .com. We were able to put the color green on it. So you've got the up arrow for begins with, the $ for ends with, or you can just do this. Put the asterisk in, and it simply means contains somewhere in that string. .com. So if you don't remember that, that's one way to handle that. Now, there's one other thing that may be helpful. I put it in here. I actually did not know this one. I had to learn this one. How many of you have people who maybe you inherit a website both of these work. Where'd it go? Here. See? Both of them end with .com. Let's go back to start with the up, and we're going to start with HTTPS. Notice how only the Google link is a direct match for this. You may actually have some URLs on your website that it is important for us to remember that case sensitivity is a part of the web programming language in HTML and stuff. But you can add an I after this, and it becomes case insensitive. I know this is an insensitive thing to do, but, and again, I may need to create a little simplified cheat sheet. But now you can put this out there, and it doesn't matter if they spell things uppercase or lowercase. Because this would be cool if you have somebody doing, somebody doing this, and you did something like this, Google. Notice how if we did this without the case insensitivity, only the Google link up here works. But when we add the case insensitivity option, these both have Google links. Doesn't matter if they capitalized it here or not. Any questions on that? Let me just ask, for those of you who are, anybody ever really dove into this before? This attribute selector? Because you can really get some fine-grained control of targeting elements. Now, you might also be wondering, how can I use this in my WordPress development? How many of you can remember every single class that comes with Gravity Forms? Well, wouldn't it be nice if maybe there was just a span, or maybe there's a div, or something that where you had a class and you weren't sure what it was, but you knew there had something to do with left. You knew there was a class that has left in there. Well, you could then target any class, any div class, or if you're not sure whether it was a paragraph tag or a div or a span or what, we can simply say everything that has a class that contains the word left in it, and it's case insensitive because I can't remember if they did a capital L or left. As you begin doing these type of things, you might find more usage for being able to target the attribute, especially like hrefs, or submit buttons, or anything that has anything in the HTML that has an equal sign where you have a name and a value, name and a value, name and a value. That's what we can do with attribute selectors. Okay, so now when we come over here, let's go back to, where's some anchor stuff here? Where'd it go? Okay, so here's our anchor stuff that we've got here. Jesse, that is a great thing that you could do. You could have any anchor tag that has an href that equals HTTP. Then you can simply do, and again, let's actually start with, to make sure that it gets there, color, red, and then you could do something like font size 25 pixels. So it just completely blows out and is like, hello, this is wrong. So any link that doesn't have HTTPS, actually it's not ends with, this upwards is start with. So we want to make sure that anything that has, what did I do? Oh, it actually starts with this. So I need to actually add in the semicolon. So that if this were here and we got rid of that, oops, where'd it go? There. See, now you show that that shows up. So you have to get the exact thing that you want. All right, let's talk about these anchor tags, because that's the easiest one for us to start to talk about pseudo elements. Sure, I'm sure most of you have heard of things like hover, color equals red. And any anchor tag, then when we hover over it, changes to red. See how that works? And you've got, if it's active or it's the focus, or maybe we've visited it before. But where we start to move beyond this stuff is a few classes that, a few of the pseudo classes that now work with CSS2. So we're all on top. I'm going to go all the way up to the top just so as it begins to refresh, we don't have to keep scrolling. So I've got a wrapper class right here And let's close the div there. So we've got a wrapper class with 2 paragraphs in here. You can see paragraph 1 and paragraph 2. Now we can start to say, all right, for wrapper, paragraph, first child, color red. So what this has now just done is said, it uses the combinators before that we talked about, the general siblings, where here's the wrapper class, show me all the paragraphs, but the pseudo classes only show me the first one of its kind, of its element. So the first child is right there. And we also have a last child, paragraph 2. Now, where this is helpful for you in your development, let's just say you have a wrapper class that goes around your blog content. So after the last child paragraph, the ending of your blog post, you can then add in the extra margin bottom, 25 pixels to kind of push it down. You saw it move just slightly. We can add much more. So there, it moves down. We can then add in the space that we need to customize or add an image or something like this. So using something like either the first child or the last child is one way to deal with this. The other way to deal with these pseudo elements is to go and take a look at like tables. Tables have repeating elements like table rows, table columns, and this is where this nth child comes into being. This can get extremely complicated. I think there's even a website that's called nth child that lets you try out different things so you can try and find it. So one way to do this is, like, if you use the table row here for each of these rows that we have, and we did something like odd, this would be every other table row gets the color red. So see, table row is odd. Or what if we want it to be even? It will go on the, or even, not event. First, second, that's even. Third, fourth, that's even. Or what if we only wanted the second row, the nth child? See, second row. So the other thing that we can do is work on the nth child. Here, I'll show you what this looks like. 2n plus 1. Now, we've got, it's kind of like the odd way of doing it. But what it's doing is skipping the first one, and then the table columns, rather than the table rows, are being selected. So nth child, when you start getting into this type of stuff, it's going to get a little more complicated. It may just be easier to deal with odds and evens and then the actual number that you're looking for and how it targets the colors. Again, it's hard to see because the table row and the table column are both going to modify the same type of thing. So the next thing to deal with is not just nth child, because it's the nth child of that. We have a nth of type. So with this, we would do something like, let me go back to, we've got a bunch of paragraphs on this web page. Nth of type, odd, color red. So now let's scroll up to the top. Here's our first paragraph. That's odd. Second paragraph is even. There's no red. Third, red. Fourth, no red. Fifth, red. Those are the 5 paragraph tags in our HTML document. So it's simply looking at the entire document and saying, of these types of elements that exist, go ahead and apply some type of style, whatever CSS you want to apply. There's one more. There's one more that, no, there's two more that I really want to show you. Let's go to this list item. If we did something like, and we'll leave that, list item only child, it will only show, and let me get rid of this one. See this? If this list item is the only one of its type that is a child of something else, some other element. See how these list items, there's 3 children of this one element. For this one, there's only a single element for this one. And so therefore it applies. Doing things like this only child is a great way that, let's say you're trying to customize the tag cloud or something that would be, normally you'd have 2 or 3 spaces because you're, let's do this example. Let's say you have an unordered list of, we'll call this one our H2 upcoming posts. Let me do this at the top so we don't have to keep refreshing. Sorry. Go to the top. This is the example that you can use in or carry over to your WordPress site. Upcoming posts. And let's say you have written a query that is pulling and fetching any of your posts that are in draft form, but it's only going to publish at least 2. Title of post 1. Title of post 2. Okay, so you set this up for your client where there's going to be 2, but you are doing pixel perfect design work for your client. And they've published these things, they've scheduled these posts to be published, they're all set to go. This is a dynamic query that's creating, and all of a sudden, they only have 1 post in the queue. Well, if they only had 1 post in the queue, we're going to lose some space. See, we're going to lose some space. See, we just lost space, everything else pushes up. But what you can do is if the list item, and again, we might do something like class upcoming. If we did class, upcoming, li, only child, font or line height, 26 pixels. You know, see how we just were able to add in that extra space that we needed? But this only operates and this only fires off if we accidentally only have 1 list item. Again, a lot of what we're doing is trying to think ahead for what might happen, and it's very specific CSS styling, but this way you know you could do something like this. Now, here's another thing that happens with WordPress. We'll go up here to this paragraph. Or this is what I mean. Have you ever seen comment? Whoops. You ever seen this? Where all of a sudden you might have a comment that sits inside this Well, WordPress, because it likes to wrap paragraph tags around things, we might actually have a problem, because what if we did this paragraph tag, and we're going to do nth of type odd, which is color red. So we do this, but look what just happened. Both of these paragraphs, sorry, yeah, that actually would work. Hold on. Hold on, I'm trying to get the actual nth of type to one second. I reset my browser page, and all my notes just went out the ability. Okay. All I'm trying to get you is there is another one that says empty. That if an element, an actual element is empty, paragraph tag element or something like this, there's nothing in it. We could do something, we could hide something. Maybe you want to retain that space. Maybe you have a paragraph tag and you need to retain that space. And so maybe you need to add in the margin so that that space appears, other than just ignoring it like some HTML would do. The other one, let's go back to this list item, because the list item is helpful here in this table. Let's do TD animal. Class equals animal. And let's add a TD here. Class equals animal. I'm just adding it to random locations. Still looks the same here. But here in our CSS, if we do TD not animal, color red. See what we've just been able to do? Based on, we can say, if it's not this class, go ahead and add this. Or sorry, if it has this class, the not, this one, we're going to add all of this. Okay, we are almost there, but because a lot of the other stuff, the selector stuff, I may come back, because it's not the pseudo element selectors of adding things to like the first letter of an item or first line. It's not fully supported yet. I gave you all that stuff in the handout. You can take a look at it. But what I want to get to is a quick conversation about absolute or the measurement units. So if you're there, you may want to skip to line or page 17. So in this, I'll go ahead and add in just this paragraph tag where we can do font size 20 pixels. Most of us are familiar with font size 20 pixels. A pixel is an absolute measurement that can be used in the real world. But there are I think it's five other measurement units that can be used actually in the real world. You can do 20 inches. And where did that go? Because I think I just exploded this. Oh, let's just do 1 inch. It's still going to be gigantic. This is actually 1 inch in the real world. Again, we are zoomed in, so it's a little bit larger. So I could, if I was doing print work, say I can handle this 1 inch, or I could do millimeters. Okay, there's my paragraphs are now in millimeters. Or I could do in centimeters. And again, it's going to be gigantic. Or I can do 1 pica. How many of you have ever heard of what a pica is? A pica is a 12-point font. 1 pica is equal to 12 point. Yes, it's from printing. It's a real-world measurement that can be translated and brought over to the web interface. Now, the traditional understanding of a pixel is that one dot on the screen. It is a little bit more complex than that, like most things in the world. So a pixel is the viewing angle of 1 pixel on a device with a pixel density of a 96 dpi pixel from one. I mean, I gave you the actual CSS specification. It is completely a complex formula that possibly the math is beyond me. I mean, if you're not looking at the handout, it is literally the reference pixel is the visual angle of 1 pixel on a device with a pixel density of 96 dpi and a distance from the reader of an arm's length. For a nominal arm's length of 28 inches, the visual angle is therefore about 0.0213 degrees. For reading at arm lengths, 1 pixel thus corresponds to about 0.26 millimeters, or 1/96th of an inch. That was probably more information than you ever wanted to know. So therefore, by understanding that, a pixel is actually a visual angle unit. And so therefore, this is where we get issues with setting everything in pixels, because when we get like a retina screen that may draw different size boxes or different pixel densities, it may be a lot harder to deal with all that. So therefore, when you're using a pixel measurement, normally the best way to deal with something is to set an initial pixel. A lot of people do that with like their font size. So what they might do is come over here to their body tag, and in the body tag, they're going to set a default pixel length of 18 pixels. So everything is going to evolve from this base pixel setting, which then brings us to relative units. If you set a single absolute unit, like 18 pixels in a location, everything we deal with can be relative of that, whether you're dealing with percentage or actual REMs or something like this. So I'm going to briefly talk to you about the relative units that you should be using going forward on most of your sites. So you set your first pixel, great. REM is becoming much more popular. And that is, I'll just say, it is the root EM of the base font size. So if you get into the habit of setting your font size in the very first tag, kind of the body tag, and you do everything else as REMs, the reference point is your original font size. That's what's built into REM. Whereas looking at an EM, what people used to use a lot more, an EM is simply a length unit of proportion to the parent font system or font declaration. So with EMs, you have the relation or proportion to parent element. Now, the problem with this is EMs, if we keep embedding EMs inside, we start to blow the screen up because it's not reverting or handling the root as giving us a solid base. So I would encourage you to start not using EMs and use root EMs, which always go back to the base font size. It's going to be simpler for you in the long run. Everything revolves around one location, and that means if you need to adjust the screen size because your client says, I can't read that, all you will have to do is update one font area, and if everything else is the root EM of that, the entire page, the entire site is going to adjust based on that relative unit. Now, the other two that you may have heard about, one of them is EX. This is a unit that is the X height of the font. So if the font size is 18 pixels and we give it a, something like a 2EX, font size 2EX, it's going to double the height of this. And it really deals with fonts. This is not used very often. Well, where this one works with the height, the CH deals with the 0 character, the width of 0, the actual character 0. That is a width. Different fonts have different widths for the 0 character. And so when you use relative CH, it's coming based on size relativity based off of the width of the 0 character. So hopefully this is your foundation that as you move forward and you walk away with how to do web development, web design, setting your default font size and then REM off of that to adjust font size, you are going to have much better solutions and outputs for your websites. And it's going to be more universally accepted across different browsers. Now, the final thing I will say about this, for those of you who have, how many of you struggle sometimes with media queries? Because all of a sudden, man, my fonts are just gigantic on mobile. And I have to go in and write every single special class to customize that for my mobile. Well, there's a fairly easy way to deal with this. Is if everything in your document is relational to the default body tag, if in your different media queries, you set the body font size maybe on a mobile device to 14, everything else is going to resize when you get to a mobile because it's relative to that. And the media query that loads overrides the body tag. Does that make sense? It's a neat little mobile first trick that as long as everything else, all your other fonts and everything else that needs a size element is on REM, simply declaring a different font size, a body font size in the media queries, different media queries, you can actually auto resize everything without having to write tons and tons of media query styling size issues. We are actually going to do another viewport element or viewport thing in a future element or future webinar. I put it in there because it's kind of part of parcel with measurements, but the last 2 or 3 pages in the handout specifically deal with that, although it's not fully supported in most browsers yet. I put it in there because when we start dealing with the grid CSS stuff, we'll need to know that. So Wow, this has been like a fire hose of information. I know some of it has been basic and elementary. Some of it we got into a little bit more deeper stuff. Let me just open it up for just another moment. Are there any questions, anything you want me to clarify? We will have this replay available within the hour. But if I leave you with 2 or 3 things, it would literally be this part right here, the REM to the font size. And then 2, spend some time really learning attribute selectors, being able to go into target an anchor tag that has the href attribute that contains something. You may not see it just yet, but I guarantee you sometime within this month or 2 months, you're going to come across, I want to style just this area. How do I do it? Well, 9 times out of 10, it's probably going to be some type of an attribute selector or a combination of classes and selectors type things. So take care. I hope you have a great rest of a Thursday. I do want to point out that if you haven't seen this, there are a bunch of new webinars on the calendar. I just put them all on the calendar, and I'm pulling them up right now. And I've got a bunch more being added after this webinar. But if you haven't seen that, I have adding and using fonts with WordPress. This is going to be an awesome one. I'm really excited about this one. We're going to be dealing with a lot of typography, designing some cool stuff. There's conditional logic, introduction to less. Got a series on pods coming up. We've got social integration with WordPress, Twitter, and Facebook, and a number of other items. But you can sign up with them there, and we will have even more added sometime later this afternoon. So we'll be able to have calendar items that go into May and June, so that you can also plan your schedule. So take care, everybody. Have a great rest of the Thursday. I'll see you on the Slack channel. And if you haven't seen, you may want to scroll back in the Slack channel. There is a nasty little virus that I discovered the other day on a site. Looks like I've been able to clean stuff, but it can do some nasty stuff. You may just want to scroll back on the Slack channel, the main Slack channel, to see the name of it and what it does and how to avoid it. And if you don't see it, just go ahead and ping me when you get there. So take care. Have a great rest of Thursday, and we'll see you around.